Welcome to the All About You podcast. My name is Sheila and I am your host. In this podcast, I invite everyday people to tell their stories of their travels, passions, and what makes them happy. So if you have a story to tell, please contact me on allaboutyoupodcast@yahoo.com and let's tell your story. So now for today's conversation. Welcome to the All About You podcast. My guest today is Louise Mcloughlin, who is a journalist and made a podcast called You Look Like Me, telling her story of finding out that she was donor conceived. So Louise, welcome to the All About You podcast. I'm so glad to have you here.
Thanks for having me. I'm very excited.
Louise, can we begin by just establishing what donor conceived means, please?
Yeah, so it's a bit of an unsexy kind of clinical term, I find. But it just means basically that for whatever reason, you had a sperm, and an egg, or an embryo donation involved in your conception. So in my parents' instance, for example, they were unable to have kids the natural way. They tried IVF using my dad's sperm originally, and that was unsuccessful. And they just knew that they wanted kids, so they made the decision to use sperm from a donor, and obviously that was successful. Here I am. But yeah, I mean, obviously we know from the conversation about fertility over the years, I think people are speaking out more and more, and we know that IVF is, becoming more commonplace, and donation is too. And I just think it's a conversation that we're going to be hearing a whole lot more about.
So just to make it clear, donor conceived, we can refer to it during this podcast as DC, and we are talking about donor conceived.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's kind of the lingo that donor conceived people use when they're writing out long paragraphs in support groups or Facebook groups. Yeah, DC for short.
Okay, so Louise, can we go right back to the very beginning? You were living quite happily with your mother and father, doing normal teenage things. Then what happened? This is the beginning of the story. What happened?
So I was 13, and my parents had gone off for a trip, an overnight trip, and my cousin, who was a little bit older, was babysitting me. And we were just having a chat. I think I brought up my mum's age out of nowhere, and my cousin laughed and she said, "There's no way your mum's that age." I think my mum had been deducting like 15 years off her age, just as a joke, just the way she told me how old she was. But I just had grown up thinking my mum was this age, and I was so scandalized when my cousin told me it might not be true. So my parents get back from this trip they'd been on, and I take my mum aside and I go, "My cousin says you're this age, but you're really this age, right?" And mum goes, "Oh no, I have something to tell you." And I remember going, "Oh, I can't believe you've lied to me all this time. Like, what could be worse than this?" And then she goes, "Actually, we've got something else to tell you as well." So she sits me down at the table in the kitchen. Yeah, just a very odd conversation, kind of. I'm not sure how soon she said it, or if she kind of dilly-dallied around the subject, but she kind of used phrases like, "Oh, we both love you. What I'm about to say doesn't mean it doesn't change your relationship with dad, doesn't mean he loves you any less." And I was only 13, and it was weird. I'd never heard of donor conception before as a 13-year-old. And I kind of knew where the conversation was going almost instinctively when she was saying, "Dad doesn't love you any less." I was like, "Oh my God, they're going to say I'm adopted or something." And then, yeah, she just says, "Dad's probably not your dad." And the UK at that time had done a thing called sperm mixing, which is really bizarre, and I don't think done anymore in the UK anyway. But they had used sperm from my father because they had tried IVF with his sperm and been unsuccessful, as I mentioned. And then they had made the choice to use a donor. But back in the day, I think they really wanted to give the parents some kind of hope that actually their child could still be their biological child. So they had mixed his sperm with the donor's sperm. So it led to this weird scenario that although she was delivering this news, no one actually knew for sure whether I knew who my biological dad was or not. And I remember, she told me that one-on-one, and then dad came in, and I think they had discussed on the drive home that it was the time to tell me. he kind of joined in the conversation, and it was, I'd only seen him cry once before in his life, and that was when his dad had died. And all of a sudden, this very strong, stoic man was crying in front of me for only the second time in his life. And it was something that was linked to me, in a way. Obviously not my string of decisions that had led to it, but as a 13-year-old, I was really aware of the fact that, dad is crying because of me and his relationship and the form that this has suddenly taken. And I think that really affected how I moved on and treated that subject. I kind of felt in many ways and assigned myself as the gatekeeper of that information. And I really needed to talk about it, if I'm honest, because it was very confusing. Like I said, I'd never even heard of donor conception before. So not only to be thrown in this situation where all of a sudden you might not know who your biological parent is anymore, but also it's kind of shrouded in all this medical stuff and talk of, there was no way for me to find out who my biological father might be if it wasn't my dad. Because back then they just destroyed all the records. There were a lot of mysterious fires or floods in all of these fertility clinics over the years, but they were just allowed to destroy them or just never keep the records in the first place, because the law at the time just didn't think that it was important that we should know as we grew up who our biological parents were. And they were protecting the people who were undergoing the treatment. Again, the sperm mixing, all of that was kind of in favor of just plausible deniability and just allowing parents to kind of keep up this fantasy that actually they are my child. We never did that donation, we never went down that route. So yeah, I mean, the most life-changing conversation I've ever had. Really felt like the rug was pulled out. And like I said, because of the emotional turmoil I could see in front of me at that age, even though I was thrown into a huge emotional turmoil spiral, I was aware that it was a subject that was deeply upsetting for all of us, but especially my father. So I never brought it up again, for years. And it got to the point where I think I mentioned it 3 years later, maybe 2.5 years later, to a boyfriend I was dating at the time. And as I said it, I was like, is this real? Like, I had got to the point where I hadn't spoken about it for so long that I had convinced myself I was making it up as, just something to make myself feel more important or slightly different as a teenager. These stories you tell yourself. It was so liberating to finally say it. But then it was like this shock to the system, like almost falling back down to earth and going, oh my God, I actually don't know who my father might be. And I think that was kind of the electric shock moment where I was like, you know what, I need to do something about this. I need to kind of firstly find out definitively, one way or another, is this man who, is my dad in every sense? Is he biologically also my dad? And if he's not, who the hell is?
I mean, Louise, I've listened to your podcast, which we will cover later, but I'm just thinking, as I'm listening to your story, the person I was at 13, I was very much a child at the age of 13. And I have no idea how I would have thought receiving this information. And for you at such a young age, all of a sudden, as you say, the rug has been pulled from under your feet. At 13, we're trying to find out who we are as an individual, our hormones, and it's a crazy time. And then to have everything that you have believed for as long as you have lived change in that one moment. I just cannot. And for your mother and father carrying this information as well, and probably realizing at some point the conversation will have to have been made with you.
Yeah, it's indescribable, really. I remember that night quite well. And actually, funnily enough, I misremembered the details of it, I guess, because it was quite traumatic, and it was actually quite a long time ago now when you think about it. But I originally remembered dad and mum both being present from the beginning of that conversation. And as I said there, it was actually my mum, and I only found out that during recording the podcast, because I relayed how I remembered it, and she was like, no, actually it was me first. But yeah, I mean, the medical advice at the time was don't tell, because there was no DNA testing, there was nothing, so parents could get away with this. And I also don't think yeah, no one really expected to get caught. And it's interesting that my parents made the decision despite that to tell me. I think they were always going to tell me. And I think 13 in their head was, oh, she's just maybe just old enough to understand it. But I mean, the guidance now from professionals who have spoken to donor conceived people, and also the wide consensus within the donor conceived community, is you tell from day one. And I talk to parents who have used donors, and they come to me and they say, I haven't told my kids, when do I tell them? And I kind of jokingly say that we have a saying in the donor conceived community that you say, tell them yesterday, tell them in the womb. And sometimes parents, get quite scared about that. And it's not in a judgy way, we're not saying that to shame anyone for not telling them. It's just the earlier they know, the better. My half sister, for example, she comes from two lesbian parents. She's always known. She's very well adjusted with it. And that you see that time and time again with people who do know from day one. There's no deception involved, there's not that rug pulling moment. And then you see, within my podcast, I talk to people who found out in their 50s, late 50s and 60s. And that's a whole other process. How do you, that's your, a huge chunk of your life has been this lie. And a lot of them are then at that point where one parent has perhaps passed, and there's all these conversations that you can never actually have. But I think there is, that said, something very unique about being told as a 13-year-old, because as you say, your hormones are flying and you are just forming this sense of who you are. And I think, undeniably, who we are is the product of the people we surround ourselves with, and our family is central to that, of course. And in my mind, I was part of this little triangle, mum, dad, me, this little 3-person unit. And in that moment, it was, ripped up in front of my eyes. And I felt like I was actually the outsider, even though I still had that biological link to my mother, because they both obviously had known this the whole time. And I felt really like I had been kept out and really probably not treated as an equal. And I know, obviously, in a 2-parent child dynamic, I'm not an equal, but it just felt like there had been this big secret in the family and I was the only one in the dark. And I think that really hurts.
You said a little earlier that you were given this information and then you literally slammed down the lid on that box for 3 years, and then you spoke to a boyfriend about it. I can understand, because you're trying to compute this new information which just changes everything, and at 13 that was a hell of a lot to deal with. And as you say, if you are in that situation, tell your children yesterday. How do you tell a 5-year-old? How do you tell an 8-year-old? I mean, who knows?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think, how do you tell your 5-year-old or 8-year-old anything, really? I think there's an age appropriate way to tell a kid. I don't have children, but I've always heard this line that has stayed with me, that I always thought I would kind of think of if I did. That is, if your child's old enough to ask the question, they're old enough to get an answer. And that doesn't mean you need to phrase it as if you're talking to an adult, but there has been a big push now. I mean, what is a modern family anymore? It takes so many shapes. Is it 1 parent? Is it 3 parents? It's just, there is no template. There's not that cookie cutter anymore, I don't think. And so what we've seen is this push for, just baby books and toddler books that are catered to these really interesting individualistic experiences. So you can now get books saying, egg donation, sperm donation, and they're just phrased in a way of, mummy wasn't able to make her own seeds, so we went elsewhere and a woman gave us a seed and we put it in mummy's tummy, kind of thing. And it's just a way to ease the kid into that story. And again, Jess, my half sister, she doesn't remember the day she was told. If you tell a kid from day 1 or age 2 or 1, they're not going to remember that initial conversation. They're just going to remember that that's their reality. She doesn't remember being told that she was never informed that her parents were lesbian and that they had used a donor sperm per se. She doesn't remember that conversation. It's just her reality that she's grown up with. And then again, she doesn't have that kind of, I don't know if I would assign the word trauma to my experience, but I know others have. She doesn't have that trauma of that conversation that she can remember that makes her stomach drop, and that's how I felt for many years. I would remember that conversation and my stomach would drop. And I spent many, many nights just staring into the mirror until my eyes were literally like blurring over. And I was just trying to deduct the features that I knew came from mum and like take them off my own face and try and jigsaw what was left and go, oh, it's my bio dad, and that's the story. Actually, I wrote that in an article very early on when I decided to finally be open about this topic, which people now think that I've been talking about it for my whole life, but I haven't. It's only been around 6 years. But that was the line that I think really resonated with a lot of DC people. They reached out and they were like, oh my God, that mirror thing. The hours I have spent in front of a mirror, looking into my eyes and trying to figure out where they came from, and looking at my face and trying to figure out who I am. It's almost like a Disney movie moment, like when the main character finds out that they don't truly know who they are. And that's the depiction that you would like use visually to show what's going on inside their head. But yeah, it's an indication of these moments that a lot of DC people share when they have the rug pulled. And again, I said that the phrase donor conceived is not a sexy topic. I think when you pull it back, all we're looking at is an urge and a craving for people to know who they are and where they come from. And is that not the basis of every single movie and book and good story? And I think when you look at it like that, as opposed to the clinical kind of weird phrasing and framing that you can give it, I think, it makes it a much more understandable and sympathetic story, really.
So, Louise, can we just go back a bit? So, at 13, you found out about being donor conceived. The lid was firmly slammed down on the box for another 3-4 years. What happened after that? I mean, you're referring to your half sister. So at some point, did you decide, okay, I want to sort of find out definitely what my background is?
Yeah, so it's a long story, and there's a lot of highs and lows and little bumps in it, actually. And again, all of this was before kind of commercial DNA testing was a thing at all. So I was pretty blind. And as I said, one, I had shut down the conversation, but two, I had been informed at that first meeting that these records don't even exist. There's actually no way for you to know who this donor is. And also there was the question of sperm mixing. So when I spoke to my boyfriend, age 15, almost 16, the first thing was, we have to find out whether dad is actually my biological dad or not, because if he is, then all of this is redundant. That's the news I wanted. I wanted to know that the man who had brought me up was actually my biological dad. It would shut down any questions. And then, that's I love this man. He is my dad in every sense. And to just get that comfort back would have been the end of the story. So I went to my parents, and this was difficult as well because dad didn't want to know. Dad wanted, as I said, that plausible deniability that he could still be my father. He didn't want to be told that he wasn't. But I had these questions that, one, I needed answered, and I needed to know, either for the comfort that he was or for the kind of mission that it was going to set me on if he wasn't. So I asked if we could do a DNA test. And it was, again, before the commercial one. So I don't even know how much it was or how we did it, but my parents must have found it for me. And we did cheek swabs, sent it off. I think it must have been weeks before it came back. And it wasn't like now, you click into the website, you log on and it comes up, and it's fairly intuitive if you're matched with someone in some way. Sometimes it's difficult to work out the exact relationship, but you can tell if you're related. This was literally like a black and white page, white paper, black text, a jumble of jargon, and you had to skip to page 5. And then at the bottom of that page, it just said, based on our data, based on whatever our research, it is extremely unlikely that client X is related to client Y. So yeah, that letter just kind of confirmed everything. And I think we all knew at that point, I think we were kind of just hanging on to the possibility that he would be my biological father, but obviously getting that is, awful. And then I told dad. He was at work when that letter turned up, And then again, that was the third time I'd seen him cry. So again, I had this moment of this man who has never cried in front of me, has now cried twice in his life because of something I have done. I was the one who made him take this DNA test that he never wanted. And now we have to live with the reality that we're not related for the rest of our lives. So I, again, shut that down, kind of lived with the guilt a little bit, still didn't really talk to people, didn't confide in friends. It was pretty clear that, my parents never told their friends, they never told our family. So there was really no one to talk to about it. And I think I broke up with that boyfriend soon after. So it kind of turned into something that I pushed back again. And then at 19, I think I was kind of on the internet a little bit more, and I realized that there was a support group for people who were donor conceived who didn't have these, this information. And this group could be joined by people who had donated in these years when it was still anonymous. So basically the law changed the year after I was born. So all of my records were destroyed, and I was in the same boat as many people. And then the law changed so that you could kind of get a few details. It wasn't fully anonymous, but it still, realistically was. So yeah, there was just this huge, few generations of us who had no info. So this group could be joined by donors who had decided they wanted to be found, and obviously donor conceived children. So I signed up to that, and that was my first kind of dipping my toe into this world of, oh, actually there might be a path to, find this guy. But obviously he would have had to know about the group, which was very, very small. He would have had to have made that choice that he wanted to be found. And obviously I signed up and it didn't go anywhere. But what I did discover was that a lot of people there actually weren't overly interested in finding their donor. They were more interested in finding their half siblings. And that to me was mind blowing. Like, I was an only child. I didn't even know what a sibling was, really. I'd seen my friends with them, but the concept of a sibling within my life is completely alien to me. And then suddenly seeing all these people, it just made sense to me because, one, obviously, there's one donor, but how many siblings are out there? You're multiplying your chances of finding someone if you kind of focus on the siblings. And then also, they're more likely to be the same mindset, right? They probably want those answers. They're probably looking to be found, as opposed to the donor who did this decades ago and probably hasn't, thought about it since, or if he has or she has, probably just does not want the headache of how many children coming up. So I think, yeah, that was my my first dip. I think I was around 2020 at this point, and yeah, the concept of siblings just suddenly popped in.
I mean, Louise, you are still very young at this age, having to deal with this. And I can understand, as you say, I slammed that lid down again. You need time to process, to compute the information. So, okay, you're now in the group. What happened next?
Again, it kind of opened my eyes to this whole sibling thing. I was actually conceived in the UK, but I grew up in Ireland. I moved there when I was 6. But I always had my eye kind of on the UK. I always knew I'd come back at some point. And I think I was here perhaps for a holiday, or I'd moved here for a few months, and I went to a support group. And again, just meeting all these people who were tossing around the idea of siblings. And I think this must have been when commercial DNA testing was kind of coming onto the market a little bit more. And it just seemed like this impossible closed off road suddenly had all these little branches off it, all these little paths that suddenly there were opportunities. Yes, they were very far-fetched, but at last there were options. And I remember I was approached by a company that were originally going to make a documentary for Channel 4. I don't think it got commissioned in the end, but I had been tested within the small group, as I say, to try and find my donor. But I mean, DNA testing is improving all the time, right? So they basically said, we have changed the way we do our DNA testing, and it's more likely now that you might get a match that we've missed. And this documentary company heard about this, and they were like, this is great, we'll go into this group of people looking for a biological family, and now that they've all been tested, but it's now more sensitive, it's more likely, we're going to follow a few on their journey and see if they get any matches. And I just signed up. I which is weird because I don't think, again, I was really speaking out about it at this point, but I think they were saying, yeah, I don't know. I must have been on the line. I must have been playing with maybe being a bit more open about this at this point. So I signed up anyway to be part of the documentary. And what they did is they got the results first, and they had it on a computer, and they sat you down in this recording studio, and you just had to, you've got the camera set up, focused in on you. You just have to open the laptop, and the results say you found XYZ, how many people, or you haven't found any matches. At this point, I think I'd really given up. I was telling myself, I don't care. I think the turbulent teenage years were over, where I was like, who am I? This is key to, everything. And I think I had just gone to college, and I'd kind of healed a few things with my parents, and I just settled into a more mature relationship with them, and it honestly made a lot of peace with it, or so I thought. And I just remember opening that laptop, and my heart was just in my throat, and I really found, they say if you have a decision to make, you should flip a coin, and in that moment when the coin flips, you'll know which answer you want it to be. It was almost like that. As I opened the laptop with the camera on my face, I suddenly realized I desperately wanted a sibling match, which I had no idea up until that moment. And I opened it, and there was no match. And all of a sudden, I was really aware of the camera in my face, and the director and the producer, who had been lovely. But all of a sudden, I think they could see I was disappointed, and they were very sympathetic. And I remember getting quite defensive and just kind of just emotionally pushing them away and being like, no, I'm fine. Like, don't talk to me right now. I'm fine. And I just remember walking out and just being so shocked that I really had allowed myself to believe in that moment that there could be a match waiting, as I lifted that laptop, and just being desperately unhappy and desperately disappointed that nothing had been there. And I think that was the moment I went, I really need to actually try here. So I think within a few months, I sent my DNA away to Ancestry and 23andMe. And I always say, it's you want these moments in your life to feel like they're monumental, like they're significant, but nothing about spitting into a tube or swabbing your cheek ever feels very graceful, ever feels, like a movie moment. But I do remember after I did that swab, just walking to the post box and, just putting that little package in and not actually letting go, and then gently opening my fingers and just feeling that box slip through my fingers and thinking, holy shit, I've just put something big out into the universe. That moment. And to this day, I can't walk past that post box without going, that post box changed my life, which is so funny. But yeah, that was maybe the moment that did feel significant. And then, of course, I waited and waited and waited. Finally, the results went into the database, and I got my email saying that everything had been checked, and I logged on to both of these sites, and of course there were 0 matches waiting for me. So yet again, I don't know how many attempts, how many DNA tests this was in over, a decade and a half at this point, and I was just coming up, no match, no match, no match, again and again and again.
Goodness, just listening to this journey, Louise, I don't know what to say. I just don't know what to say. An emotional roller coaster. You're going from, yeah, okay, I'm fine, and then you're thinking, well, actually, putting this package in the post box could change my life. I don't think many people could probably cope with the ups, the downs, the decision making, the uncertainty, I don't want to say rejection, but when you get the no match, the disappointment, maybe the relief, who knows? It's a whole gambit of emotions. You're made of strong stuff, girl. You're made of strong stuff, definitely.
Well, I don't know if I'd say it that way, but I think it was such a slow burn. And the fact that, how long have we been talking for now? Like almost, around 30 minutes, and we haven't even got to the point in the story where, I've already teased. Yeah, already teased the fact that there's a half sister there, but it just does illustrate how, how long drawn out this this journey was. And again, for some people, I'm so lucky. Some people never get answers, and again, some people find out in their 60s. This journey has felt like the longest thing I've ever done, but at the same time, now I am over the line and now I have got these answers. So, I mean, yeah, so basically 4 years ago, almost to the day, it was the night before bonfire night, I think. I was living in the UK at this point, had done these DNA tests, as I say, and I got this message on Ancestry that had actually weirdly gone into my junk mail, even though I would have signed up to Ancestry emails. I have no idea why. And it said, "Hi, we have matched as a close relative, which means we could be first cousins, half sisters. You could be my aunt, I could be your aunt." I mean, like, it's really funny how the DNA kind of works. Or I could have been her grandmother, or vice versa. And she said that she was born 1990, which was the year before me, in London, in a clinic. She was donor conceived. So all of a sudden I'm going, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, this is what I wanted. This makes this, everything lines up. And I went into my flatmate. It was just the two of us home that night. And I was slamming, almost like breaking down his bedroom door. And at this point, I was talking a bit more freely to my friends and all about it. Obviously, they had kind of, living with me, had known that I was doing the Channel 4 documentary. So he kind of knew a bit of the background. But again, I was putting on this brave face and pretending like I didn't care that much. It's not a huge big deal. But I think he, of all people, really knew that it was. And he definitely knew when I was banging on the door. And my voice was so high pitched. I've never heard it like that before. It was just like an alien sound coming out of me. And all he could hear was me like squeaking the word sister, sister, sister. He was like, calm down, calm down, calm down. So I finally got it out. I was like, someone's just got in touch with me. Could be my half sister. All of it lines up. All of it makes sense. And he's like, well, answer her, answer her. So I send her an answer through Ancestry, and then she gets back to me almost immediately. So we swap numbers straight away. We're now sitting down at the kitchen table, and my flatmate takes out his phone and starts recording. And he records the moment I save her number, and she accepts it on WhatsApp. And so her profile picture comes up, and I see the face of this woman who could be my sister for the very first time. And I'm just facing it towards him and trying to like thrust this phone into his face, going, does she look like me? Do you think she looks like me? And he's like, yeah, I don't know. Like, he's trying to see it. He's trying to egg me on, but also not get me too excited. He was like, yeah, I kind of see it, But because he did that, and because he thought of, grabbing that phone, we have some of the audio that's, part of episode 2, I believe, in the podcast, of just that raw moment where you can just feel all the emotion that's been building up for years and years. This search is like kind of coming to its first, big climax all of a sudden. And there's all this hope and all this, I think you can still kind of feel the protective barrier up as well. If I believe in that moment that this woman is my half sister that I've been looking for, and then she's not, how do I deal with that disappointment? How do I come back from that? So I'm being very guarded. But she is kind of putting out the same energy as me. She's obviously joined this site because she's looking specifically for half siblings. And I'm frantically trying to figure out how we're related. Like I said, it said close match, and we know it's not like aunt or granny. But my fear at that point was, we're going to be first cousins. She's not going to be my sister. So she is out somewhere in the country, and she has to get in the car, and I take to these Facebook support groups. So We Are Donor Conceived is kind of the big worldwide one, and then there's smaller kind of national ones as well in the UK, the US, wherever you're based. So I take to these and I go, this is, the amount of centimorgans we're matching. I don't understand any of this lingo. I don't understand the data that's in front of me. I'm just saying this much, 1,400 whatever matches, centimorgans match, and then it's saying this possibility, this range, and they come back and they go, that's absolutely a half sister. I'm like, oh my God. And she's driving, so I'm sitting on this information looking at my flatmate, and I text her and I go, we are 100% half sisters, and she doesn't see it for another hour. So yeah, I mean, I can't describe that. And then only, years later, that's how I understood that whole situation and how that night went down. And then years later, it turns out she sent that initial email to me from Ancestry, which I missed because it went into my spam folder. She had sent that maybe 3 days ago, but she'd been sitting on it and thinking about that email for maybe a week before that. So she had actually logged on, matched with me immediately because I had signed up to the site previously. And because I'm a journalist, I'm quite public facing. So I'm online, you can Google me and my articles, my photos, my show reel, all of that comes up. She'd actually been stalking me online for like a week. And all this, like me dying, going, oh my God, are we, like, she knew we were half sisters. Like, she could see her face in mine. She'd been sitting on this information. She didn't tell me this until like 2 years ago. So it's just really funny of how I remember that night and how she remembers that night. But yeah, it was I've never known a night like it. You said the word roller coaster. It was insane. And even to this day, I haven't found any more half siblings through the site. And people say, would you like to? And the concept of more is obviously amazing, but there's only so much energy. I mean, no matter if an experience is good or bad, when something's thrown at you like that, it's such an adrenaline dump, and it really does drain you. And you need a few days off work after it. Let's just put it that way. It's the most insane experience that ever can happen. And Jess and I say that now, it's just looking back, nothing, no matter how many new matches we get, even though we found our biological father since, nothing else will ever match that. It's insane. And I, again, have spoken to people on the podcast who have matched with, in some cases 200 plus siblings, but in many cases in the US, around the realm of 50, 60, and they roll in constantly. And I'm in awe of people who are able to do that on a consistent basis. But you have to build up your brain to just be able to handle that level of input and constant turnover of new siblings. Like, if you react the same way Jess and I reacted to each other every time, you just have no energy to do anything else in life ever. Because it's just, it's like an earthquake.
This is part 1 of my podcast with Louise, and the second part will be released next Sunday. I hope you have enjoyed the conversation. Don't forget, if you have a story you would like to tell, please get in touch. My email address is allaboutyoupodcast@yahoo.com, and thank you for listening.